I think always needs to be present when engaging with the C-suite is making it actionable and making sure that your data has the ability to be analyzed, even if it's not part of the project, but that your data is helping them understand something that's happening now and is something they can be making decisions on now, even if it's not an actual element of your project, but always being able to articulate how it helps in the near term. I wish I would have known that earlier in my career talking with C-suite.
Number one, and this is the absolutely most important thing, is that most researchers often think of the communication of insights as the end of the project, and they don't think about it as the start of a campaign. And so you need a shift to think about it as a beginning of something, and you need to be able to deliver something which is much more focused on delivering action. So in order to do that, what we always recommend is that you use a creative brief. And by using a creative brief, you will be very focused on what your core overriding message is. And therefore, you will be tailored to the right audiences. And you might think about different types of deliverable that you might need to develop for them. The second tip is to use experts. I think researchers often think they can do it themselves, whereas there are trained people who will be better, and you shouldn't be frightened to use them.
News stories, films, TED. With news stories, you begin with a headline. If you're interested, you read on. You look at the next paragraph, maybe you look at the next sentences. It's very clear, it's been done for decades. Films take a different approach. They take you through a story, through a journey, and then they reveal the conclusion at the end. These two things aren't always compatible. Imagine something like Jaws, leading with a headline. Big rubber shark, gets blown up, eats a load of people before that. Or Star Wars. Darth is actually Luke's father. Darth cuts Luke's hand off. Luke kills him accidentally, the end. It sort of ruins it. So I prefer something a little bit more blended. And for there, I found my inspiration at TED. Not the 18-minute talks, not the 12-minute talks, but the principles around opening with a powerful statement, keeping it short, supported by some great substantiation, and then finishing, but bringing it all to life with a well-rehearsed, well-structured, clear thought.
So first of all, keep it short. I've been in presentation to C-suite where you think you've got half an hour, and after 10 minutes the marketing director decides that he's got something else to do, and so you've basically, if you're not keeping it short and giving them a really good summary up front, the danger is they won't take on the information, or they won't get to the point where they can make a decision. Obviously, make it as commercially focused as possible. Giving C-suites or suite-suite, in a C-suite environment, giving people information is not enough. You've got to make sure that it's absolutely business focused. So, and make it action oriented. So, give them a key finding, but then say, well, what does this mean for your business, and what you should do therefore. So the what, so what, now what is really a really good way of making your presentations and your communication really focused for the C-suite.
These are busy people. Don't waste their time. If you're there, you have credibility, so don't waste your time trying to prove yourself worthy. First tip, do your homework. Know why you're there. Having that objective clear is a great starting point. Know your audience, opinions, relationships, whether they like numbers, narrative, and very importantly, if there's any politics going on. Know your stuff. Be ready to answer a detailed question and have that information at your fingertips, or preferably in your head. Second tip, be clear, be succinct. Make it easy, tell them a story, give them a hook to remember your message. Skip the detail. If they want to know it, they'll ask. Have an opinion, be honest, and give clear direction, and then they'll generally like it.
A key trick that we use when communicating insights with the C-suite is to have teams pitch their ideas like startups do. We bring in real entrepreneurs who have experience pitching to get actual funding to train the teams up. These pitches also include real evidence-based research using transactional or behavioral findings, which directly informs the team's pivot, perish, or persevere recommendation to the C-suite Innovation Board. Really should be noted that these are not one-and-done pitches, though, because especially when we're working with more revolutionary insights or kind of unknown territories, leadership needs frequent check-ins, and this happens in the environment of a metered funding context. So they have to pitch to garner their funding for each next step forward. So that really, it keeps leadership in the loop and bought in throughout the process.
Remember, Less is more. Keep it short and concise, structuring your story around the main recommendations that you want the directors to focus on. Don't structure it around the data or the questions that were asked. Keep it focused on the actions that you want taken as a result of the project.
What you find with senior stakeholders is they're often working at a broader business level, an organisational level, so you have to find specifics within the research question that's been asked and understand how they can be applied across often multiple departments, multiple stakeholders, and understand what the broader business applicability is. Any advice I'd give people presenting to senior stakeholders is to remember that they're just people and that they want to be entertained and they want to have good research as much as the next person. So as long as it's an entertaining presentation, as long as you couch it in real information and strong research, it'll go well.
Now, I found that the key was to be succinct in making my main point, then you would evidence it, and then maybe give some extra colour if needed. And what didn't really work was leading them on a narrative, which had a sort of a dramatic reveal or plot twist at the end. It wasted time and irritated them. Now, by all means, make your slides visually impactful, use humour when required, to make your point. But what I found was that C-suite people really want business information to help them make better business decisions. They're not after infotainment. Another tip: don't waste time establishing your credentials or the validity of your data. You wouldn't be there if that was in question, but just make sure you can back it up in case you're challenged.
You have to remember that C-suite executives likely have really different priorities than you do as a researcher. Harvard Business Review published an article a few years back on the changing path to the C-suite, and there was one really strikingly consistent finding. And that is, once people reach the C-suite, those functional and technical skills, the skills that researchers spend most of their careers really honing, matters less than leadership skills and a strong grasp of business fundamentals. So chief information officers need to know how to create business models. Chief financial officers need to be able to create risk management strategies, and chief marketing officers really need to know how to create a brand that consumers will evangelize. So in other words, the skills that help you climb that ladder and get into the C-suite won't really suffice once you get there. And what we're seeing is that C-suite executives have more in common with their executive peers than they do with the people and the functions that they run. So that really means that researchers just have to learn how to speak that C-level language. There was also a really interesting article from Quirk's 2017 Corporate Researcher Report, where corporate market researchers were asked how they measured their own success, and 65% said actions taken on insights, but only 3% cited organizational growth, which is likely how the C-suite is actually measuring success. So that tells me there's still a pretty serious disconnect between what market researchers think is important and what C-suite executives think is important. So think about that when you're crafting your presentation.
Firstly, they just want the overall highlights. So the information needs to be short and to the point. But they're also interested in your recommendations and suggestions too. But I think the key point there is it needs to be short. And I think the final point to make is, don't be afraid of delivering bad news. Often the CEO would prefer to see what's not working and what needs to be fixed, rather than continue reports of good news and how well the business is performing.
You want to know your audience. You also want to know your stuff. So practice, and practice some more. You don't want to take an encyclopedia. No one wants to dig through pages of reports to understand what's going on. Think Spark Notes, right? Be high level, top line, but be prepared to dig deeper. But don't be afraid to say, I don't know the answer to that, and I'll have to get back to you on that. No problem. We can't know everything. And, most importantly, just be yourself and have fun.
Tell a story and entertain. If you contextualize the data into some sort of real life situation that hopefully, members of the board will be able to relate to, then they will be able to understand and absorb the message that you're giving far quicker. And secondly, use humor where at all possible. After all, we all enjoy a good story, particularly if there's an enjoyable punchline. And if you can weave the results of what you're presenting into that, then your message is simply unbeatable. So there you go, short and sweet, contextualize, entertain, and put it into a context, as I said, that any normal human being sitting around the board can relate to.
For me, there are two things to focus on when thinking about communicating to the C-suite. The first is about keeping it simple. The second is making it real. When it comes to keeping it simple, there are three things I have in the back of my mind. I need to tell them what they really need to know. I need to convince them why they should believe me, and I should show them why they should care. When it comes to keeping it real, it's about taking the abstract and conceptual nature of numbers and making them more human, relate them to the people that their decisions actually affect and the things that happen to real human beings as a consequence of their work. If you focus on those two things, you'll get something really nice and concise. It doesn't have to look beautiful, it just has to be really powerful and impactful.
One of the best ways to get your point over to a C-suite audience, I've always found, is through repetition throughout the presentation. Obviously, don't make it too obvious, not like Donald Trump, but if you span it out and repeat your main points maybe about 3 times, that really does get the point over. Another great technique actually is to use verbatim comments that actually sum up the main ideals and findings that you're trying to get over. And equally, another great way is to use a Voxpopme type of scenario that again sums up what you're trying to say.